As an extremely late addition to this video, Nikon USA has stated on X, previously known as Twitter, that, quote, "We plan to add bird detect AF to the Z6III by the end of the year. Stay tuned." Now, this is something that I've talked about quite a number of times in the last couple of weeks, especially since it arrived on the ZF. But the important part here is that bird detect is coming to the Z6III. Very exciting. Great work, Nikon.
G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope you are super well. And yes, it is a Z9 firmware update, but it is probably not the firmware update that most people watching this video would like to see. We've gone from firmware 5.10 to firmware 5.20. And that means that this is a minor update. And yes, it is very minor. There is one addition and there is one change and there is a couple of bug fixes. After we talk through those minor updates, I'd like to ruminate. I'd like to speculate on what should we expect firmware-wise from the Z9 moving forwards now that this camera has been here for as long as it has. All right, firmware 5.2. Amazing, considering that the majority of those updates have been major, and they have actually had major additions to the Z9. The first and only real addition in this update is adding support for NX Field. Now, this is professional software designed to allow you to be able to control multiple cameras in the field. It's pretty cool stuff, isn't it? I mean, if you're doing that, that is awesome. And the fact that the Z9 is now being brought up to date when it comes to NX Field. The next update is that they have renamed the D14 to display on during burst. And then just fixing a few minor issues. Pressing the playback button after repeatedly shooting bursts would in rare cases corrupt the display of all images. In rare circumstances, optimal exposure could not be achieved during burst shooting after changing the exposure in mode M. In synchronized release, pressing the shutter button of the master camera halfway initiated autofocus on the remote camera with the following settings selected: custom setting menu A6 AF activation AF on only. As we can see, it's a minor update, minor bug fixes, very rare use cases, and those very rare use cases are happening very rarely. That is, that they are causing some sort of error. Also released at the same time as Nikon NX Tether version 2.3.0. Exciting. Added support for the Z50II, amongst all of these things. Here we are, the Z9 released late 2021. We're now heading towards mid-2025. This camera has been in the market nearing 3.5 years. So some might say in the DSLR era, where pretty much every camera had a 4-year cycle. So is it possible that the Z9II is not that far away? So how much more firmware can we expect? Personally, I don't think we're going to be running on a 4-year cycle with the Z9. And the main reason for that is that I still think that this camera is a highly capable camera. And except for a very small number of use cases, which would include pre-capture RAW, and I would say an even fewer number of cases where people really need more than 20 frames per second in RAW, they would be the only two use cases that I can think of today where the Z9 does not meet its version 2 counterparts, and that is the R5 II and the A1 II. But beyond those two, the Nikon Z9 continues to be commensurate or ahead on so many metrics compared to its peers in the market. Maybe Nikon is not in any particular rush. As I've talked about before, it could be for the Olympics in 2026, the Winter Olympics, and maybe Maybe it's even longer. Now, you might think the Winter Olympics is a long way off, but of course it's not. It's roughly a year away. And thus, that sort of time frame would make a lot of sense to me, and it would get us back to a Olympic cycle, which is something that Nikon kind of mostly adhered to through the DSLR flagship era. The other thing to me that's really interesting with the cameras that we have is that they're all so competent now. We've got the Z8, which is pretty much just as competent as the Z9, minus a few things, of course. And then we have the Z6III, which is a very powerful 24 megapixel camera. And then behind that, we have the Z50II, which has absolutely blown my mind for being such a powerful entry into the Nikon Z mount. I think there's something that we have to remember is that when the Z9 was released, it was the first Expeed 7 camera. That's it. There were no others. So there was an enormous amount of demand. And it took 18 months until the next camera that was similar, which is the camera over here, the Z8 arrived. That made the Z9 extraordinarily successful. Today, it's a very different story. We have 6 Expeed 7 cameras in the market to meet pretty much everybody's needs. Maybe a few people's needs are not being met. More cameras to come. Always more cameras to come. But that would mean that the demand for a Z9II will be less than a Z9. It's just very simple. There are plenty of people that will stick with their original Z9. They're super happy with the Z8. Maybe they're happy with a Z6III or a Z50II, a ZF or a Z50II. All of these cameras are very, very powerful cameras. All of them with Nikon's state-of-the-art autofocus system. Z9II, the demand is not as high. Z9II, the jump, from my perspective, is unlikely to be anywhere near as big as going from, say, the D6 to the Z9, or what was the top of the range camera before the Z9, the Z7II to the Z9. Either way, whether you look at the Z7II or the D6, it was a massive jump to the Z9. This is simply not going to happen again, and the same demand is not there. So we have to think about that. How much of a hurry is Nikon in to get a camera where the market is much, much smaller, and the use cases where Nikon is not meeting the R5 II and the A1 II, which are second generation flagships, is very, very small. It's a small market. And besides those two niches, the niches of RAW above 20 frames per second and pre-capture RAW, besides those two use cases, Z9 still extraordinary. So to me, when I think about those two things, there's not a super rush to bring the Z9II to market, and who knows what hardware advancements Nikon is trying to bring to us. Of course, the more time that they can spend on that, the more advanced the camera will be. Potentially. We all know that Nikon, when bringing out the Z9, made an enormous leap, bringing us the first ever flagship 35mm mirrorless detachable lens camera that didn't have a mechanical shutter for the purpose of taking photographs. Completely removed, the only shutter that's in this camera is there to protect your sensor. Otherwise, it's fully electronic. It's that fast. It's that state of the art. And still, to the best of my understanding, besides going global, there is still no sensor as fast as the one in the Z8 and the Z9. That's quite an achievement when we're thinking it's been more than 4 years since the development announcement of this camera. Epic. So maybe Nikon's going to do something like that again, so we have to wait longer. Who knows how long that will be? Or maybe it'll just be iterative. It's really, really hard to say. But we did see with the R5 II and the A1 II, they were iterative updates, which is more commensurate with what we've seen in the industry as a whole over the last 25 odd years of digital photography and the advancement in digital photography. Yes, digital's been around longer, but the mass commercialization of it. And thus, more firmware. Well, it's hard to say. This is 5.2. Is there a 6.0 coming? If the horizon on the Z9II is further out, let's say it's 12, 18 to 24 months, which I think, to be honest, is probably likely. I would put even money on there being at least one more major firmware update What's in that, it's hard to say. We do have to remember, for example, with things like imaging cloud, there might be hardware in the newer cameras that supports imaging cloud. And that may well be the same for how pre-capture works. We just don't know. And of course, the Z9 is now the oldest of all of these cameras, and the Z9 is the blueprint. It is the DNA of Expeed 7. And my guess is, considering they'd pretty much finalised the technology in the Z9 way before they gave us the development announcement 4 years ago, this camera was probably in serious development 3 or 4 years prior to that. Thus, we're talking 6 to 8 years ago that this camera's hardware, the technology within it, had to start to be finalised. And there simply might be some hardware missing within it that allows us to get some of these newer features. But then there are some other features, let's say like product mode, which I think is probably completely software driven, that could be added. But it's arguable that Nikon don't plan on putting it in cameras that don't have flip around screens, because that is a simple delineation between a camera that's used by creators who are looking at themselves, as I am right now on the Z6III, versus the Z8 and the Z9 not being used for that sort of thing. I get that because I'm now using the Z6III all the time, not due to the flip-out screen, but due to the 6K or the 5.4K. I just don't need more resolution. I want more than 4K, but 8K most of the time is just simply too much hard drive for what we're doing here right now, a talking head. Personally, when using the Z8 and the Z9, I would have loved product mode. So I'd like to see it there, but maybe there will be that differentiation, who knows. And thus, I do think there is possibly new things that could come to the Z8 and specifically the Z9, but it's just a matter of whether it will. Now, one of the most compelling things that will keep everybody happy about their Z9 into the future for longer is that we do get another major firmware update. So, as I said before, I think even money that we might get a major update 6.0, who knows what might be in it. Beyond that, probably not. I really can't see a horizon outside of 24 months or 2 years from now when a Z9II might drop. That to me is sort of feels like the limit, but then who knows? There might be some technological breakthroughs that they're working on. We just don't know. All right, everybody. Well, there is firmware 5.2 for the Z9. Exciting to see that Nikon continue to support their flagship camera and keeping it as up to date and also as bug-free as possible. That is super cool.
And also just released is an extremely minor update for the Z50II. This is version 1.01. Pre-release capture is now available using the small rig SRRG2. The language of Russian is added for cameras that are sold in the Middle East region. D13 has been renamed to display on during burst, and a couple of minor bug fixes.
I also wanted to briefly mention that my dear friend Bobby Tonelli, do go check out his channel and his launch video for the Viltrox 35mm 1.2. This is for E-mount. Now, we believe it's pretty much certain that it's coming for Z-mount. I haven't heard anything about that yet officially. Hopefully sometime soon. I really look forward to testing that lens. If it's as good as the 135 Lab 1.8, then this is going to be a really exciting and compelling lens. Bobby has shown me some images that he has shot with the 35 1.2 for his launch video, and they are very impressive. In due course, I will put the 35 1.2 Viltrox and 35 1.2 Nikon on my two Z9s, and we will test them out and see how they fare. But I have to say, it's very exciting to have this other opportunity, and ultimately for me, what's wonderful about this is that it's giving photographers of all types the opportunity to get into high-end lenses, low light gathering lenses, and so they can create and play. And that is only a good thing for creativity. I look forward to bringing you more about that lens ASAP. All right, everybody, it's been so good to see you. Please let me know your thoughts about the Z9. When is the Z9II coming? Firmware 6.00, will we get it? Maybe, maybe not. and the new Viltrox. Are you excited? Please let me know in the comments below. It's been so good to see you, and if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.